What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more acid-techno, and we're back with another tune called Acid in My Mind. This one is from 2012, so a year before Sterling's, and the same year as Acid in Your Soul, so you can see why when I thought to react to Acid in Your Soul, a couple other tunes immediately came to my mind given the similar names, and they were all released around the same time period. But yes, this one comes from Scythe Squardon, one of the coolest logos I've ever seen in the world of acid techno. Now, the spindle hole sort of, it doesn't let you see the unequal eye size, which gives the skull here a bit of a, crazy look. But one of the talk bubbles coming out is a musical note, and the other talk bubble is a heart. And yes, ultimately, this is a Polish acid techno label. It's been defunct for a while now. I think the last release was 2015. It started in 2006, so it almost ran for about a decade. Now, the first couple releases were more in the hard house vein, I would say, and then by the third release, it began to shift much more toward acid techno, which is when the label became directly involved with Stay Up Forever. It sort of came under the Stay Up Forever collective stable, and eventually tracks from Chris and Henry and many of the real Stay Up Forever acid techno heavyweights would ultimately appear on the label. But yes, Osmo is one of the founders of the label. I think his real name is Tomas, and he's from Poland. So yes, we're going to listen to one of his tracks, as I said, called Acid in My Mind. And this one is a bit of a contrast to Sterling's Acid in My Mind in that it has a very almost like psychedelic acid techno feel. The acid work is very immersive and intense, not in a wicked, evil sort of way, more in a bright and rich type of way. But it definitely gives my brain, anyway, a bit of a psychedelic acid techno experience. I remember using this in a number of mixes, but one of the mixes I used it in, I remember sampling that famous scene in Cheech and Chong's Up in Smoke when Chong inadvertently gives Cheech too much acid and then starts laughing like, oh my god, I've never seen anyone take that much acid in my life. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But either way, I have very fond associations with this track because it's, again, just a cracking tune which has a very, acid-heavy, almost psychedelic feel to it, but also because I've used it in a couple mixes where its conjunction with the samples that I use seem to come off really well, which, again, the idea of that scene and those samples mixed with a tune like this, I think it just fit perfectly. So, in any case, let's give it a listen. This is from Scythe Squardon 10, which is given the name Inside the Government, which is the title track of the release. But this one is called Acid in My Mind. It's by one of the label founders, Osmo, and it is a cracking tune. And as I said, this is from 2012. a bit more wicked. Breakbeat incoming. Amazing. It's like being, for most of the track, it's like being in the center of a warm and euphoric acid hurricane with, again, a bit of a psychedelic disorientation. Now, the breakdown suddenly gets a bit edgier, a bit heavier, a bit darker, and then when that breakbeat drops in, that's a really great moment. I love that syncopated breakbeat and the way it fits with the acid work that's going on. But again, for most of the track, before and after that breakdown, it just has this bright and enveloping and warm euphoria of acid psychedelia. So yes, of the 3 tracks I reacted to in this batch, and although they are what I would consider apples and oranges, meaning, they're all doing slightly different things, and I think they all are successful at the style they're going for, but if forced to compare, or if forced to pick one of the 3 that I consider the most comprehensively compelling, it probably would be this one. I really do enjoy the intensity, but not in a wicked evil sort of way. It just has this bright, immersive euphoria and intensity. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this tune. There are a number of Osmo tracks on the early releases. Again, the first 2 I think are both Osmo records. So he was sort of the lead producer in the early stages of this label, even if, again, once it became affiliated with Stay Up Forever, you start seeing a lot of the acid heavyweights on the label. But I think Osmo continued to have tunes on many of them. But yes, I think this is a really underrated track, and I feel like it's the kind of tune that can really start your mix off well. In fact, I'm going to look up, I want to remember what the name of that mix. I use this in where I did Cheech and Chong samples, so give me one moment. I think Better Put Your Seatbelt On, I believe, is one of them. Yeah, I think that's the mix. Better Put Your Seatbelt On. Which is, it's not a direct quote, or maybe it is. There's that line where, you know, Chong says, because Cheech is like, oh, you gave me acid? I never had no acid before. Like, what does this mean? Like, what am I going to do? And Chong says something to the effect of, well, you better put your seatbelt on, man, because they're driving around at the time, and he doesn't have his seatbelt on. So I love the implication there that, like, you know, you and by extension me now are in for a wild ride. So, you know, what does it mean that you took more acid than I've ever seen anyone take? It means you better put your seatbelt on. I absolutely love that. But yes, I use this track first in that mix, so if you want to check that out or hear it in the context of a mix and with samples that I think really emphasize what the tune is doing anyway, which of course is part of why I started putting samples in my own mixes. It was just something where I could kind of like tell a story with a mix, even beyond the stories that the tunes are telling individually. So yeah, that was, I think, a good example of what I've always been trying to do with my sampling in my DJ mixes. In any case, let me know what you think of this, and I will see you next time. Peace.